Hello, everybody, and welcome to the LeanTossup Call of Duty podcast. This is it, guys. This is the last major of the season. Everything is on this until champs. Three teams have been eliminated from competing in champs. Two teams are left potentially fighting for the last, I think, yeah, the last spot or the last two spots potentially. I think theoretically, I think the one team hasn't clinched yet, but we'll get to that in a second. I'm, of course, joined as always by my co-host CDLMetrics. How are you doing tonight on this Wednesday night?
I'm doing good. Yeah, looking forward to the last major of the year. This one hosted by Toronto Ultra, so we will have fans in the audience. That's always good to see, as opposed to what we had at Major 4. Yeah, we'll see if Optic. I think this is the major that the big question mark is, will Optic win a major this year? They seem to be like the last good team that has yet to win one. They're the odds-on favorites, which we'll get to in a moment. But that, to me, seems like the big storyline heading into the weekend is, are they going to win finally? It seems like this is the week to do it for them. But yeah, happy that Rocker went back-to-back wins last weekend. I was not expecting that at all. And I unfortunately wasn't able to catch either of the matches. I was busy last weekend out of town. So I just was checking for updates, hoping they would at least, cover a map and a half spread, and they ended up winning both times. So that was refreshing to see, keeping their distance on Vegas Legion for that final spot at Champs. It's not locked in by any means, but Rocker's path going forward looks pretty good. So yeah, fingers crossed that they can hold on to that as well. But yeah, obviously looking forward to the COD this weekend as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's gonna be an interesting weekend of COD, I would say. So again, weekend is a strong word there. Starts on Thursday tomorrow. So we are getting this a little late, but that's okay. Lots of stuff to talk about. So first off the top of on the top of it, obviously, whenever we do the major, and we will do this for champs too, we talk about the outrights, the futures markets. So to win the major, Optic plus 115, Phase plus 250, Ultra plus 450, Subliners plus 700, Breach 12 to 1, Thieves 10 to 1. That's weird that they're flipped, but whatever. Rocker 16 to 1, Legion 25 to 1, Surge 50 to 1, Mutineers 100 to 1, LAG 500 to 1, and then Ravens, I think. Yeah, they're five. It's hard when there's so many zeros. It's a little hard to
Yeah.
see it, but I think it's also 500 to 1 there as well. So, um, I'll tell you what. I'll go first. Okay, I'll go first with my odds to win this because you posted yours on Twitter, so I have not posted mine on Twitter yet. I have a 61% chance out of 10,000 simulations. 61% chance that Optic wins. Period. End of sentence. I then have another 15% chance that FaZe wins, another 14% chance that Ultra wins. Everybody else is less than 1,000. Everybody else, like New York, is like 4%. Boston is 1%. Thieves is 0.4%. Um, Obviously, London and LEG, I'm sorry, you have been eliminated already, which is cool.
Yeah.
Florida almost eliminated only 30 times. That's rough. Seattle only 15 times. So Florida's better odds of winning than Seattle. So that's news to the bookmakers. Um, but yeah, it's not good for a lot of these teams. I will say to make finals, I put Optic as an 86% chance to make finals. I put FaZe at 39, so just shy of 39.48. So you could almost round that up to 40, and then Ultra at 39.23. Again, both kind of 40% chances. Again, only one of them can. Basically, what this is saying is there are three teams: Optic, Phase, and Ultra. Optic is very likely the best of the two of them, and maybe they can get to finals, and maybe one Ultra and Phase are gonna basically face off in the losers bracket finals in some way. One of them will win and go on to the finals, and then they have a not horrible chance. They have a chance to beat Optic if they get to the finals. That's basically what this is saying. It's saying everything else isn't like LA Thieves. They move a couple of rounds, but they start hitting some choppy waters because again, the problem is once you get to the losers round, like losers round two. They have actually they have a 57% chance to get to losers round two. So the model doesn't love who they're playing round one. But at a certain, yeah, because I think that's right. Because they play either Florida or Optic. So the model actually thinks Florida's pretty good. But basically, and for a lot of these losers bracket teams, especially Las Vegas, it gets really choppy once you start getting past the first couple rounds here, because then all of a sudden you're getting a random Florida falling, or you're getting a random Thieves falling, or you're getting a random Ultra or Phase. Like, you're getting one of the bigger sharks that is going to fall, right? And that's where it becomes a lot very difficult for a team like Vegas or a team like Minnesota to move forward. Now, I actually do have Vegas as a better chance to win than Minnesota, but it's very tricky as to see exactly how far Vegas will get into the tournament as compared to Rocker, right? I have Minnesota's better chance to win round one. Both are severe underdogs in round one. I have Minnesota's a better chance to win round one, but I basically, based on these expectant values, it's hard to say exactly. But I have Vegas as a slightly better favorite to basically make it a little further into the tournament, which is, to be honest, that's all they need, right? They just go a little further than Rocker, and they'll be okay. Well, they have to go a lot further than Rocker, because they're 20 points behind them, so they got to go at least another round or two. But that's how I see the board. How do you see the board?
Yeah, so my numbers are quite different. I do agree with you that it's a three-team race. It feels like I've got FaZe at the top, and I did tweet these out, and I tweet these out every major, and I update them after every day, to adjust for which teams have been eliminated, what the paths look like moving forward. But the pre-tournament tweet is always the biggest one, and today for me it just blew up. It's just Optic fans and FaZe fans just murdering each other in the comment section, which is hilarious to see. But yeah, if you've listened to us all year, it's not a surprise that for me, Atlanta FaZe are still the best team in the game. So I do have them as the highest odds to win. Not very heavy favorites. In fact, I think this is the smallest favorite I've had so far for a major this year. So it should be a really exciting weekend of COD. But FaZe I have at about a 34% chance to win, so about 1 in 3 times. I have them winning. Plus 250 to win outright is a little bit of value, so maybe consider taking FaZe there. Or if you did what I did a couple weeks ago and FaZe's champs number was up in the plus 300 to plus 400 range, that was a better bet to make at the time. But yeah, if you still want action on FaZe this weekend, I think it's justifiable. Second, I have Optic, 25%. So about 9% down. I do think that is a little much, just because, again, my model doesn't really adjust for recent performance quite as much as yours does. So 25% might be a little low. Maybe it's closer to 30%. I think them and FaZe should be very close in terms of just overall odds to win. You look at Optic's path, it's much nicer, in my opinion, than FaZe's. Right, Optic get Florida Mutineers in round one. That's a great matchup to ask for. Round two, if they win that, they get Boston or Rocker, which to me are two, middle of the pack at best teams again. So yeah, it could be a really nice couple of days for Optic to start things off. And if they were somehow to go down to losers bracket, I think they're fine wherever they land there. Round one could be tricky for Optic if they do lose and have to play Thieves, just because we've seen what Thieves can do when they get hot. But I think all in all, Optic's path is better. You look at FaZe, they play Legion in round one. To me, that's a slightly more difficult opponent than Mutineers. And if you're FaZe and you win that, you have to play a good team in Toronto or New York. Ideally, you'd play New York just because I have Toronto as the superior team there, but either way you slice it, it'll be a bit of a challenge for FaZe in round two, should they beat Legion. So, yeah, to me, FaZe and Optic really close. Toronto also surprisingly close behind Optic. I have them at 22% chance. Maybe you upweight them as well, just considering that it's their home major. They look pretty good. The issue, though, with them is their path is pretty difficult. You play New York in round one, which, it's not FaZe, it's not Optic, but that's one of the tougher teams. So maybe they slip up there. If so, you get LAG in losers round one, which shouldn't be an issue. And then maybe from there you can go on some crazy losers bracket run. But for Toronto Ultra, right, the path is beat New York, probably have to beat FaZe, and then should you go through that, you're probably playing Optic in that winners bracket final. Obviously, if you lose at any point during those, you're going to have to go on some sort of losers bracket run. But yeah, I just think Toronto is great. They're one of the best respawn teams in the game, so they deserve to be in that mix with those other two. Yeah, and then from there it just kind of cascades down. Also, Toronto at plus 450 to win outright. Not a horrible bet, in my opinion, either. If you want a little more variance and you want to cheer for a home team, I don't mind that at all. Yeah, and then from there, it's pretty flat. Like New York, I have fourth at 9%. They're plus 700, I see, which isn't quite good enough for me to pull the trigger on. Again, their path is what Toronto's path is, but they're underdogs in round one, so tough. Boston, I have at 6%. At plus 1200 price, not quite good enough. They have a relatively easy first match versus Rocker, but after that, we'll see. Their path really is just kind of get lucky and hope you get hot on Thursday and Saturday. But we'll see from there. Then a pretty big drop off. I have LA Thieves after them at a 2% chance. And I was actually getting railed on Twitter today because a lot of Thieves fans were like, that's way too low. And apparently, people have taken action on these websites because I saw this morning LA Thieves at 14 to 1 to win outright. They're now 10 to 1, which to me is just a horrible, horrible bet to make. I mean, you have to get 6 wins in a row for LA Thieves to win this major. Like, it's possible. We've seen them go on crazy losers bracket runs before, but this is also a Thieves team that went 1-4 in the qualifiers. Like, their only win was their last match against London, so congratulations on that. And their losses were not like particularly close either. It wasn't like, oh, you're losing a bunch of round 11s in search, or you're losing a bunch of 10-point hard points. They did have some close losses, but they had some concerning losses against some quality teams and some middle of the pack teams. So I'm out on Thieves this weekend, just considering that they have a losers bracket start. Maybe they can rattle off a couple wins, but we'll see after that. So yeah, they're at 2% for me. Minnesota and Vegas are both at 1%, which I find pretty interesting. Rocker's path to me is easier. I'd say much easier. And this is one of the storylines going into the weekend is who will be the 8th seed. And it might be neither of these teams. If both of these teams get hot, like Seattle could fall to the 8th seed or Boston might fall, like there's still a lot to be determined there. It most likely will be Rocker, but it could be Legion if they surprise, or if Boston or Seattle slip down, it might be one of them. But you just look at Rocker's path. Like, they play Boston in round one. That's a pretty soft landing. If they win that, they probably have to play Optic, but there's a chance Florida come through, and now you have 2 relatively easy matches. Boston did beat Minnesota earlier in this stage, but of all the opponents in winner's bracket that you could get, as a Rocker fan, getting Breach, I'll take that every day. Legion gets FaZe in round one, so you tell me who's better, Boston or FaZe. And then if Rocker were to lose, you go down and play London in losers round one. That's maybe the best matchup you could ask for. If you're Vegas and you lose to FaZe, which again I think is more likely than Rocker losing to Breach, you go down and play Seattle Surge, who are very inconsistent and deserved a loser's bracket start for this major, but we've seen what they can do, and I actually might favor Seattle in that game if that were to happen. So, good path for Rocker, not so good path for Legion. And then from there, yeah, Florida, I have at about a 0.5% chance they win the whole thing. It's probably not happening. But some interesting action on them as well. I saw them at 250 to 1 to win the tournament earlier this morning. They're now at 100 to 1. So, by raw numbers, that's a huge shift in terms of, percentage chance to win, it's not much of anything. But just notable that maybe some people came in on Florida because the number was so ridiculously big. Um, if they can get past Optic in round one, like maybe because their second round game would, in theory, be easier. And then can you get lucky and somehow make your way to Sunday? It can happen, but very, very unlikely. Yeah, Seattle, I have 10th, basically 0%. They do win it a couple times in my simulations, but very, very unlikely. And then, yeah, London and LAG, it's just not happening for you guys. I'm sorry. So yeah, that's where I stand. It's a 3-horse race in my opinion, with a very slight chance that somebody else surprises, whether that's New York, Boston, maybe LA Thieves, maybe Rocker, maybe Legion, but probably even not those teams. So that's where I see it. It could get really interesting. I'm really looking forward to the weekend, um, but yeah, if it were up to me, I think FaZe and Ultra are probably the best bets on the board. I would steer away from Thieves. I get Optic, like I get the love for them. I'm gonna stay away for this weekend as well. They're basically even money to win at this point, which I can't get behind. I know they like just never lose online qualifier matches, and that is worth something, but I don't know. I just worry the price is way, way too high for them right now.
Yeah, I mean, I could get on board with Toronto. I like Toronto at +4. Well, I mean, it's still not. The odds aren't amazing. Like, I'm not like, oh man, gotta love that +450, because +450 translated is 18%. And if you
Right.
remember correctly, I've got Toronto at 14%. So like, it's not great. It's definitely not great. Um, but I definitely don't like FaZe at +250. That number is wrong. That number should be way higher because Optic is just so good. Like, they can't beat Optic. They have not been able to beat Optic now. Because like, here's the thing: what's the point in betting 250? FaZe goes on this long, arduous journey to get to Optic, and then they're what, +150? So now you're like, this is the thing, right? In a finals, Optic is probably what, -200 to beat FaZe. Minus, like, probably
I
-200.
don't
That
know
seems about
about
right.
that. So, one thing I think people forget a lot with the grand finals is that it's a best of 7. So, being the better team does matter because the series is longer, and we can debate who's better, FaZe versus Optic, but the layout of the map pool is humongous. And it's an issue, I think, right? If FaZe made another grand finals this year, I do think they'd have another win under their belt. It's just they've only been to the one at Major 2, and they won it pretty easily. But the fact that you get 3 search and destroys, and the fact that there are an equal number of hard points and controls means if you get to the grand finals, it's really, really advantageous to be the better search team, which FaZe is by a mile. And I think Optic is fantastic at search too. They actually just jumped Legion in my model, but FaZe are still the kings of that mode. So the fact that you can get to a game 7 and be in that mode is humongous, and it does downweight teams that are good at hardpoint, right? Usually hardpoint is arguably the most important mode because you play it more than any other mode throughout the year. It matters for tiebreakers because if you can win 3-1, that is a lot better than winning 3-2. But in the grand finals, right, you're playing control as much as you're playing hardpoint. And yes, you play hardpoint earlier, you play game 1 and game 4, but we've seen the last, I think, 2, maybe 3 grand finals end on that game 6 control. So yeah, control matters a tiny bit more, hardpoint matters a tiny bit less, and search matters a lot more, in my opinion. So that's kind of where it skews things. So that's why I get those numbers that I get, just because it is such a shift in that grand finals. Um, but I get it. Like if Optic get hot, get out of the way. But as we saw with the last 2 times they got to the grand finals, they did fall short in part because their search wasn't quite up to snuff and their control wasn't quite up to snuff. So again, that's my pause with Optic. Obviously, they are the hottest hardpoint team right now. They can carry themselves to a grand finals win with just that. Like they're dominant in that mode, and it's scary like watching them play against anybody because it could be a 250 to 90 game. But I worry about their other game modes just a little more than the average person. So that's my argument for that.
Yeah, I mean it's yeah. I mean, I'd be rolling with Optic, but we'll see. But I'm not loving that plus 250. I really can't sit here and be like, yes, I feel
That's
happy
fine.
about.
That's
I'd
fine.
feel much more happy about the plus 450. To be fair, it is the home team, and Ultra is good. I mean, Ultra did win. They won Major 3. Yes, they did lose in Major 4. But at the same point in time, they got eliminated by what was it, Thieves, or was it FaZe? I can't remember who it was. Um,
Toronto at
yeah,
Major 4. Ooh. They didn't make top 4, right? Because that was Thieves beat Optic, Optic beat
They lost to
FaZe.
phase. They lost to phase in map 5. They lost to phase in map 5. That's why.
But New York was 4th place, so Toronto were top 6, I think.
Yeah, Toronto was top 6 because phase had fallen out of the because phase had fallen out and then basically they collided with Toronto. That was the second last game on Saturday. But then Subliners beat Minnesota to get themselves to Saturday too, and then phase beat Subliners. Optic crushed phase, and then Optic lost to Thieves in the final.
Yeah, okay.
Because Toronto got knocked out super early. Actually, no, Toronto started in the losers bracket because of their poor qualifier performance, right? So
Mhm.
this is the thing where it's like, I mean, was it a bad major? No. Was it a good major? No. Was it bad? No. I mean, you lost to the team that came in third, and like it was in a map 5. Like it wasn't like you got blown out. I mean, you lost to the team that you lost to the team that came third. Also, you lost map 1 by 6 points. That looking at that map, like they lost the hard point by 6. If they win that hard point, suddenly it's a Toronto 3-1 because Toronto won the control and they won map 4. And then now they did lose the 2 searches. That's fine, and that's Toronto's weakness is search, and FaZe's strength is search. But again, if Toronto can win through hard points, I think it's advantageous to them. But again, it's a hard call. I don't love FaZe. I like Toronto more, but at the same point in time, you can't fault someone for for going
Yeah,
with FaZe there. But I just think that plus 250 the math doesn't add up for me. But
that's fine. I will say, does the I know I made it 2 3 weeks ago now, but the phase at I want to say it was plus 350 to win champs, and part of my argument there was like they're likely to be the 1 seed. It's not a lock, right? Like Optic keep gaining a little bit of ground. FaZe still has a 15-point buffer to work with. So really, as long as Optic doesn't win this major, they should have the 1 seed wrapped up. And we discussed earlier that the 1 seed does it feels like it is going to matter a little bit this year just because the 8 seed will be relatively weak compared to the 6 7 5 seed whatever. So that I think makes a little more sense just looking at that in retrospect. Plus 250 for this major might be a little high. I just think that was a misprice a few weeks ago. One thing I will mention with Toronto, though, if you are semi intrigued with them but you're worried about search, is you could take them just to reach the finals at
yeah,
plus 185. Obviously, that the payout is not quite the same,
but
but
my model's
it
going to show
is.
value on that. Yeah.
Yeah. It like Toronto, like their weak point, and it's not even that they're bad at search. It's just they're middle of the pack. A lot of teams are middle of the pack in search and destroy. But you look at their hard point and you look at their control, and their control especially jumps out as like, holy crap, that team is dominant in that mode. They're 15-4 on Hotel, 11-4 on El Asilo, 2-1 on Expo, right? Small sample, but so far so good. And like, yeah, their hard point, they can crush anybody. Like, that's the one thing with Toronto is they could wake up one day and just decide to beat everybody by 100 points in hardpoint. Kind of what like Optic is doing right now. So maybe if you're looking for like if you're not super high on Optic like I'm not, like Toronto seems like a good pivot because they could match up pretty well, right? They can go toe to toe in hardpoint. We saw them beat them in a grand finals already, taking both controls. Search might be a little bit of a disadvantage for Toronto, but I think they're close enough to Optic where like that could go back and forth. So, and it's the home team. They're a good organization. They're maybe being slept on a little bit. So, yeah, I totally am fine with Toronto, especially if you're kind of looking just at that, like to reach the finals market, or if you want to pivot to like an MVP, you could also go with that, I suppose.
Yeah. So and then that's a perfect pivot to the next part of our futures bets. MVP. So now, do you see anything here you particularly like? I'll list off the numbers again here. I'll list off the numbers here. Shotzi plus 350, Dashy plus 500. They're the top two optic players. Celium plus 650, Abizi plus 900, Scrappy 10 to 1, Hydra 11 to 1, Kleenex 11 to 1, Hook the next optic player at 14 to 1, Simp 16 to 1, Awakening 20 to 1, Beans 33 to 1, Cammy 33 to 1. I'm not sure why that's kind of random that he's up there. Ghosty 33, Hixie 33, Octane 40, Draza, Kenny, Envoy, they're in the 40s. And then just kind of gets lower than there. And I don't think we're really looking at anybody else other than that. The question becomes like with Optic, like the thing of it is MVP markets let you get basically juiced odds on a team to win if you're confident that if X team wins, then you will get a better price on that team, right? Like so for example, say you're like I like Ultra but I don't like the plus 450. You're like I think Scrappy's going to win MVP if they win. So then I get it at 10 to 1 now, right? But the problem is with Ultra I definitely worry about Kleenex cuz Kleenex could just go off and then that could basically get them the win, right? Like that could be a really big thing for them. So I worry about that. At the same point in time, if Optic wins, I mean, if you've got a Dashi ticket, you definitely have to worry about Shotzi. And if you've got a Shotzi ticket, you definitely have to worry about Dashi. Celium and a BZ, I kind of think that's mispriced. I think a BZ should be the higher, but at that point, then Celium could just go off too, right? Like, what are your thoughts on it? Do you see anything you particularly like in this market? Would you rather just play win and make the final? I don't love highest KD ratio because they're not particular like there is some randomness that is associated with that and it's hard to figure out exactly what is what. But we'll what markets do you like in MVP? Basically, we'll leave it
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So I guess if we just want to focus on like those top three teams, so like as someone who likes phase, yeah, to me a BZ sticks out at 9 to 1. If we think about okay, who won the MVP when they won the major, that was Simp. He's 16 to 1, so a lower price. And I don't know. I'm just of the belief that if a team wins more than once, the judge panel or whoever votes on this stuff is gonna try to give the next MVP to somebody else. So Simp at 16 to 1, even if that might be an okay value, I don't know. I don't think they would give it to him twice unless he went crazy on the entire weekend of play. Yeah, BZ sticks out at 9 to 1 just because I feel like it's I don't know if he doesn't get the season long MVP award. I think they're gonna want to give him something, and I think he's deserving of the season long MVP. But like this team wins through search and destroy, and it's because of Abizi, right? Like you talk about first bloods all the time. He is the king of those. Celium is going to put up numbers every event he's at, and he very well could win the MVP if FaZe were to win. But to me, there is enough of a difference between the two of them that Abizi is the more appealing price to me for that. Um, and then, yeah, like Slasher, I'm not really interested in. I don't even know where he's listed. Like, probably 50 to 1 or something. Yeah, 50 to 1. Okay, boom, spot on. But yeah, no thanks on that. If you're looking at an optic player, right, you have two right at the top, Shotzi and Dashi. Hook not too far behind, 14 to 1. I would go Ghosty at 33 to 1. The argument being like this team, since this guy has been on the roster, like this team's been unbelievably good. Like the turnaround that this team has gone through this year, like you just point to, okay, when was Ghosty added onto the team? And then look at Optic since. And it's like, huh, he's a pretty valuable player, I would say. So if they win, And Ghosty's numbers are not fantastic. He's just not ever going to be the guy that's going to go crazy and probably have the highest KD on his team. But if he's close to his teammates, I can totally see them giving it to him. He's a good story, right? He's a rookie. They can shine a light on that. I just I would buy into the variance, and it's a 33 to 1. So yeah, I like that for Optic. If you want to go with one of the higher end guys, I would probably go Dashy. I think that would be a good story too. Dashy was the Major 1 MVP last year, went absolutely crazy. He has been putting up some ridiculous numbers recently. And his price, I think him and Shotzi should be basically the same price. So the fact that you're getting a little more value on Dashy, I like that. But yeah, for me, Ghosty is the pick if you like Optic. And then Toronto is a little tricky. Yeah, Scrappy and Kleenex basically tied. Scrappy 10 to 1, Kleenex 11 to 1. Really feels like they would give it to some like one of those guys. And considering Scrappy has already won an MVP, that would lead me to look at Kleenex at 11 to 1. But I don't know. Like to me it's a little odd that Insight is 66 to 1. Like yeah, actually that might be the favorite play for me if you like someone on Toronto. Again, just, assuming Scrap doesn't win it again. Like Insight can put up numbers too. The issue is like he's an AR as is Scrap and Scrap puts up some crazy numbers means Insight doesn't all the time. But I don't know, 66 to 1 for a player as good as Insight on a team that's as good as Toronto, I think that could make sense. I guess you could make the same argument for Hixie. He's also 33 to 1, like Ghosty. To me, two very similar players. They play a different role on their teams, but like you can see since Hixie's been on the team, like Toronto has won a major and they look pretty good like since he's joined the team. But yeah, to me, I don't know, Insight jumps out like 66 to 1. That's a pretty big number for a player as good as he is. And then players from any other teams, like in terms of my odds, we're looking at maybe subliners players, maybe breach players. Um, I don't know. It's tough, man. I mean, I have subliners winning 9% of the time. So assuming like the subliners players are pretty even, like in terms of stats and what they do this weekend, there's maybe a 2.5% chance any of them win MVP. So you'd have to look at like a number that's 50 to 1 or more. Priesta is 50 to 1, Skies is 50 to 1. So those are pretty appropriately priced. Hydra is 11 to 1. That's a little steep. And Kismet has already won the award once. So I would stay away from him. So yeah, maybe if you want to sprinkle something on the subliners that are 50 to 1, you could do that. But honestly, I'd rather just take Insight at 66 to 1 because he's on a better team and I just think they have a much better chance of winning. So yeah, that's where I'd go. I don't know. Do you see anything super deep that looks interesting? Maybe like Arcities at 750 to 1?
No, I think that's a little too tall. I mean, the thing of it is, this is gonna be. Do I think LAG could win a game? Yes. Do I think they're gonna be like, we're gonna win one game just as an FU to our company and everything? Um, that's something we could do, but at the same point in time, like, are they gonna win? No. Is our like is Arcides gonna play next year? Like, he has not had a particularly good year. It's been a
Yeah, I don't
very
know. That was more a joke, but
Mhm.
like,
It's been a
yeah.
really rough year for our cities. Everything has gone wrong with LAG as a team, as a company, as just everything. Like, London has given up. Florida is not horrible, but they're not in the greatest shape either. So it's Florida will probably. I bet you, like, if Optic knocks out Florida, I bet you Florida will knock out Thieves, and we'll have to see that number, and I bet you that number will get bet up. So hold that line when that number comes out, but watch for it. Anyways, all right, let's get into the games. First game up, we've got Atlanta FaZe versus the Las Vegas Legion. The spread is out to -2.5, plus 160 on the -2.5. Legion +2.5, -210. FaZe -600 on the main line. Legion +375. Over 3.5 -190, under 3.5 +145. which is very weird. That's a huge difference in spread because they're saying that there's a non-zero chance that Legion could sweep them, which would be fascinating to see. This one is weird for me. I've got FaZe with just shy of a 90% chance to win this, so it's actually some value on FaZe moneyline, not a lot. Now, this one is weird because I've got FaZe as about 49-point favorites in the hard point, but I went back and I rewatched FaZe versus Legion the last time they played. And Legion was doing really well in the first game, but then there was some sort of error or something. They had to do a restart. And then Legion fell apart. They lost game one, then they lost game two, then they got swept 3-0 because they lost game three. But the question is like what if that reset doesn't happen, Legion possibly goes on to win game one or at least covers the spread game one because I think it was a pretty big spread. And then everything is different because then their stats are then inflated and FaZe's stats are lower basically as a result of that. I don't know if I'm going to bet this, but I keep the thing of it is I keep looking at this number and I keep trying to get myself to yes on Legion plus 31.5 map one. I don't know if Legion's going to win this game. I don't think they are. The thing is the plus 2.5 at minus 210. That's not particularly fun because Legion can get swept as we've seen before, and it's unclear exactly where Legion is going to be able to punch through and stop FaZe. Um, but I don't know. I don't love particularly anything in this matchup. Maybe a hard point spread, but like FaZe is way better at Legion in Search. I've got them like winning the Search 6-2. I've got a 3-2 control, but like FaZe could just Legion could decide to suck at control one day. I'm not sure if the FaZe is going to let them get him on that expo. But again, plus 125 at the for that isn't a horrible price. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I also like FaZe. I'm actually surprised you have as big of a number on FaZe as you do. I've got them at an 81% chance to win, so I'm in the ballpark of where you're at. So that just kind of generally means I don't see value on either team here. Um, yeah, like we saw this already. It was ugly. It was a FaZe 3-0. Um, I They did not play Himmelmet Expo that time around. I cannot imagine they're going to this time around. Um, FaZe are the higher seeded team, so I expect that they'll be Team A, meaning Game 1 is probably their map pick. So I'm more comfortable in FaZe covering a map spread if they are Team A in that map 1. Um, I think they're the better hardpoint team. If it's their map, they should definitely be the better hardpoint team. We've already talked about their search dominance, and then if you're not getting expo control, if you're Legion, like it very, very well could be another 3-0. So that's kind of where I see this one going. Yeah, maybe it's a 3-1 if Legion can pull out a search and destroy, if it's somehow not expo control, or if FaZe fall on their face in hardpoint, which they do sometimes. But yeah, I don't know. To me, it's very likely a sweep or a 3-1. I would be a little surprised if it goes to a map 5. Even if it does, I like FaZe in that situation as well. So yeah, to me, all signs point to FaZe. The price on them is way too steep, though. Like plus 160 to sweep. I'll pass on that. I would need it somewhere in like the plus 200 range for me to be interested, but we're well short of that. So, and I don't have faith in Legion. I know they're still fighting for the 8 seed. Like, that's a huge deal. So they're going to come out and give them hell. And maybe, I don't know, maybe knowing that Expo Control won't get picked can give Legion some like practice on some of the other control maps. I don't know. You're going to have to throw a curveball in the veto process to have a chance, in my opinion. But even then, I don't think it'll be enough to take the win or to really get to that map 5. So, yeah, for me, a stay away. Expect a FaZe win. And yeah, as someone who's interested in FaZe futures, like to me, this game isn't. I can just pass on this and be fine. So that's kind of where I see it. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's about it. I will say, like, I don't know, whoever made the schedule for Thursday, I feel like they did about as bad as they did. Like, I don't know why is this the kickoff game? Like to me, I would rat well, Yeah, I would probably put Minnesota Boston first.
Do they
Then
forget that Las Vegas Legion isn't the Paris Legion anymore?
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I just to me the order of all these is a little wacky. I guess I understand why Optic's third because you don't want their fans leaving the venue early after they win. So you put them third and make them wait a little while, but like Toronto, the home team should probably be last. Minnesota Boston is like kind of the whatever match, but for whatever reason that is last. Phase come out first. I don't know. To me it's all backwards, but irregardless, like
I have zero idea how they make the schedule. I got no idea. Like it's like do they just randomly like I have no idea. It's very weird. But anyways,
I wonder if they ask the highest seeded teams like where they'd like to play in terms of the day.
no,
Like
there's no way because
Optic,
then
you get the
but
one seed.
Optic is
Where do you
always
want to
like
play?
we're always gonna pick third because Optic is literally always the third match. It doesn't matter. It's always the third match because they want the Optic fans to stick around, right? So
That's
like,
true. Yeah.
but like I have no idea. Like it's so weird. I like they're just like because there's no way to predict it. It's just like here's the schedule. And we're like okay, I guess this is a schedule. Um, anyways, moving on to the next match. Ultra versus Subliners. Ultra minus 1.5 plus 135. Subliners plus 1.5 minus 175. Ultra minus 150 on the money line. Subliners plus 115. Over 4.5 plus 160. Under 4.5 minus 210. Subliners, of course, last week doing something very weird in the subbing out Skies for Wardy. Um,
Yeah.
and it if you remember back in 2020. It's stupid because it doesn't make any sense at all. But if you remember back in the 2020, the last game of the NFL regular season was between the Philadelphia Eagle and the Washington. At that point, they were the football team, but the future Washington Commanders. And basically, it was for a playoff spot. And if Washington won the game, they'd be going to the playoffs. And the Eagles were eliminated anyways. They were just basically, if they lost the game, they get a better draft pick. And what happened was Washington's main quarterback Alex Smith had been injured for a couple of weeks, so the Washington team was playing. I guess we'll just call them Washington team because they didn't really have a name. Washington was starting, I believe, Dwayne Haskins. He subsequently died a couple of years later in an accident, but basically the the Eagles clearly didn't try. They had earlier in the season they were starting Carson Wentz. They benched Carson Wentz. They're like we're done with Carson Wentz. They were playing. I believe they were playing Jalen Hurts for a couple of weeks, and they were playing Jalen Hurts for the first part of the game. But then at the end of the game, into the third and fourth quarter, when there was a chance that the Eagles could actually win the game, they were like, "We're going to start our third string quarterback because we want to see what we have in him." And now the Eagles promptly lost the game. They got a better draft pick, and then a bunch of stuff happened, and eventually the Eagles got to the Super Bowl, and then they had two first round picks this year. But all that is because of the result of that game. Now, not because of the sting of the quarterback thing, because the Eagles lost that game, they got a better draft pick, and then they were able to trade back into the draft, and just a bunch of stuff happened because of that consequences of that game. And like it's just like but the thing is it's so stupid because that none of that applies here because one the subliners are locked into champs, so okay fine. I mean it's in the same way that it's a meaningless game. But like giving Wardy a game to play wasn't particularly advantageous. As a matter of fact, he was one of the better players on the team to be fair. Like in just kind of an insane thing, he was actually one of the better players on the team in that game. Like there's no draft here, so it's not like your positioning is better helped out by not by losing the game. It's not like your seeding in the major was helped or hurt in any way because honestly, I don't even know if it mattered or not. And there's because of how this works, there's probably no way to tell actually. Um, like the only way this possibly makes sense is if you want like you don't want Wardy on your team next year, but you have him, and you're like, man, we'd really like to trade this kid, and maybe we can like generate some buzz with him in this one game. But like that's insane. That doesn't make any sense at all. Like it's so not like unless they wanted to see how it would work and make like because he was actually objectively one of the better players on their team next year. Like unless they got Wardy for a couple years and they're thinking they could try to hype him and trade him. But again, just absolutely insane things for New York Subliners to do. Anyways, back to this game. my model is really low on Toronto, which this happens because the model thinks Toronto sucks at search and destroy. So then because of that, then they basically auto lose game five. So anytime it goes to a game five, they just get crushed. So the model sometimes does this with Toronto and a lot of teams that are bad at search. But I've got Toronto winning game one, three, and four. I don't particularly hate Toronto minus 1.5. I don't hate Toronto money line either, even though I do have subliners favorite in this game. I don't hate those things. I also do not hate the Toronto hard point spreads. You're getting minus 13.5. That's amazing. I'll take that any day. And you're getting Toronto minus 1.5 plus 155 in map three. I'll take that too. Um, what are your thoughts on this game? Do you kind of agree with me in the general sense of this, or or do you think that there's some value here on subliners?
Yeah, no, I like Toronto. That shouldn't surprise much just because we already talked about the futures. But yeah, Toronto to me, they're a 60-40 favorite in this game specifically. Um, Slightly better hardpoint team. These teams are basically dead even in search and destroy, in my opinion. So if it were to get to that game five, like the searches are probably a split either way, but we'll see. I mean, crazy things happen. And then Toronto, obviously, very, very good at control. They can square up on any map. New York, good on everything but Elisilo, so that will likely be their veto. But I think they're going to be underdogs on either of the other maps they play. Hotel would be a lot of fun, and then Expo would be interesting just to see what those teams look like head to head on that map because both have wins and losses on there, but I mean, again, small sample with that specific map mode combo. So, yeah, to me, I like Toronto, not enough again to take them in this specific, individual one-off game. I'm more interested in their future and them, building wins over time. But yeah, it's actually interesting. I had this at minus 135 this morning. Now it's up to minus 150 for Toronto on the money line. So seems like more people are feel inclined to take Toronto as well, and that makes sense. I think they're the slightly better team. They're at home in a comfortable environment. New York have been a very up and down team throughout the year, so if you catch them on a bad day, like yeah, they can win easily. So the way I see this, I think Toronto will win probably in a 3-1, but that plus 135 to cover that map and a half is just it's not quite there for me, and I'd really just rather put that into the futures market instead. But yeah, to me, if there's any side to take, it would be the home team Toronto Ultra.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment too. Yeah, but there's some like I'm not the biggest fan on this. There's a lot. This game, these games are a little weird, but I think there's some value there on some of that stuff. Next up, Optic versus Florida. This game's at 4:30 in the afternoon. Optic minus 1.5 minus 190. Florida plus 1.5 plus 145. Optic minus 525 on the money line. Florida plus 340 over 3.5 minus 220, under 3.5 plus 165. Um, I don't hate. Um, I don't even hate the. Like I actually kind of like the minus 2.5 here for Optic. I love Optic in this game. I think Optic has a 90% chance to win this game. It's hard for me to see Florida winning any map. I don't. That being said, that's not a knock on Florida, right? As I've said before, my model is super high on Optic, and like I just think Optic is ridiculous at this game. Like Optic minus 40.5 in map one, that's nowhere near enough points. Optic can cover that easily against this Florida team. This Florida team isn't amazing, particularly good at this. Um, Optic minus 1.5 map two, great as well. Not so. I'm not the biggest fan of Optic minus 1.5 map three, and then but if you're on Bodog, you can actually get Optic minus 30, minus 20.9 in map four, which is even better because at that point, if Optic fails to close out map two or three, then Optic will close out on map four. Or if somehow they've fallen behind, they've lost both respawn, like both search and control, then now you get this. Now you're sitting on Optic, like, because if they crush the map one, then now you're suddenly sitting at only minus 30. There sometimes Bodog does some weird things, or Bravada does some weird things with map 1-4 spreads. But yeah, lots of ability to take advantage of some of this stuff here. I think it's I think you've got some amazing opportunities here, and I think we you could definitely place some bets to take advantage of that for sure. So I'm on Optic here. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I am too. I just think I don't know. It feels like any match that Optic run into outside of like FaZe or Toronto, it's going to be really hard for me to argue the other side unless right Optic somehow like get lucky and win a match in advance and no one's picking up on that. But yeah, in this specific match, like we've seen Florida go toe to toe with a lot of these really good teams and they just fall short. Like it's great that they went 3-2 in the qualifier stage, but I don't know. A couple of those wins were against easy competition. They did beat LA Thieves, but a lot of teams beat LA Thieves over the past few weeks. So not crazy impressive. Still a good win nonetheless. But yeah, I like Optic here. Interestingly enough, I actually think there's a little more value in the -1.5 price than the -2.5 price. You can justify both. Like if you want that, extra payout because it's a bigger number. It's like plus 185, I think. Yeah, versus -190. Totally fine with that if you think Optic just come out and steamroll the competition, which they like to do lately. So yeah, to me, this is again an 81-19 game like Atlanta Vegas is. Um, so yeah, I think Optic probably take this. My model says most likely it's a 3-1, but again, you take a look at what these teams have done lately, and yes, Florida has been better. Their hard point has been improving. Their control, honestly, isn't that far off from Optic. Like, I still have Optic favored in the controls, but it wouldn't shock me if Florida, take three defenses and somehow take the control in game three. So yeah, like I think Florida can make it a little messy, maybe force a game four. Wouldn't be crazy if they force the game five either, but the problem is like I just have them as significant underdogs in hardpoint and in search, and that's an issue. So yeah, I side with Optic here. Again, not a ton of value. A lot of these games late in the year, there's just not going to be a ton to love. But yeah, if you're someone like me and you don't love the Optic futures and you think those are maybe a little overpriced, maybe you can just pivot and take them in like this individual match or their round two match, whoever they line up against. But yeah, Optic should take care of business pretty easily, I think.
Yeah, and that's the issue, right? When you're either betting on Optic or betting against Optic, right? It's just like, well, like Optic has been just so dominant the last couple weeks, and that's what the model's picking up on. The model's like this team is terrifying. You don't want to touch this team in any way, and I just you don't want to bet on the, you don't want to bet against this team in any way, and it's just like because they've just destroyed teams, especially Florida as well too. Like they crushed Florida 3-0. And again, this is one of the issues with the way the schedule is set up, right? Because it's like, okay, you got 3 weeks and you're playing some of these teams. Well, some of these matchups are literally matchups that just happened like days ago. Like Florida played Optic. Florida played Optic just I think like last weekend, right? FaZe played thing like I mean, obviously, if you were to expand it and have more games for qualifiers, obviously you'd have more overlap. But at the same point in time, you'd actually have like some potential, some distance between these things, especially if everybody was in a winner's bracket. So, whatever. That's my 2 cents on this. Maybe we'll talk about for champs. We'll talk about how best they can fix all the mess that is the CDL. But anyways, moving on to the last game of the first day of the major here, Boston versus Minnesota. Boston -1.5 plus 150. Minnesota plus 1.5 -200. Boston -150. Minnesota plus 150 to the money line. Over 4.5 -1 plus 160. Under 4.5 -210. So I am a little confused by this line. My model absolutely loves Boston in this game. It loves Boston. I've got Boston as almost -244. I've got the -1.5 at -116. I'm even sprinkling on a little bit of -2.5 because I've got that at plus 273. I'm getting that 425. Um, For some reason, the hard point is a pick. I don't understand that at all. I've got Boston as a 60-point favorite in hard point. Now, to be fair, though, a lot of this is because Boston crushed subliners, and subliners were a good team. Now, that was because they swapped out Skies for Wardy, but to be fair, Boston could have beaten them anyway. It wasn't like it was a foregone conclusion that subliners were going to win that game. That's why I didn't bet that game at all. I'm just like, I'm not touching this. Um, but yeah, like I got Boston as much better in control, and I actually think Boston's a better search team too. So Boston is inconsistent, yes, but and Minnesota pulled out all the stops there to beat Thieves, and I think to beat Toronto. Questions about how much they actually cared about those last couple games, but like this is for keeps, and I can't. This Boston team is one actually not safe for champs. They theoretically could be passed over by Minnesota or or Vegas. So I think this Boston team is going to come out here and kind of put this Rocker team away. I think this Boston team is finally in a position where they're actually maybe they're finally starting to work as a team here. And although Attach is back, that's great. But I definitely worry that maybe it's just a little bit too little, too late. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is interesting in a lot of ways. One, I don't think this should be the last game of the day. I think this should be the first game of the day. Um, I guess I understand it in terms of like these teams are pretty close in the overall points table. So, right, maybe Minnesota can finish Major Five and somehow jump Boston, or maybe Boston extend the lead over Rocker, whatever. Like, I get that, but I don't know. To me, this should be the first game of the day, not the last. But I kind of agree with you. Like, my model sees a little bit of value on Boston Breach. I don't have them quite as heavy favorites as you do. I've got Boston as a 62% favorite. But to me, they're just like the slightly better version of Rocker. Like, slightly better at hard points, slightly better at search, slightly better at control. And when you add all that up, like, yes, Rocker could win if they get a little lucky and pull out like a round 11 win or a round 5 win in control. But like we just saw this matchup a few weeks ago at the Minnesota home series in Minnesota. Boston come out there. There was a little bit of drama because I think Boston played with the sound equalization setting on, and Minnesota wanted to GA that, and Boston were like, no. And now Boston are like blacklisted from playing eights anymore because of that stuff. Anyway, irregardless of that, Boston in that matchup in Minnesota, and this was the old Minnesota Rocker roster, let's remember, but like Boston dominated game 1 and game 4. They won control comfortably, and their only loss was a round 11 in search. If that goes the other way, it's a sweep. It's a really, really impressive victory. Then as you go, right, like Boston sweep Mutineers, a little bit close in game 1, but otherwise pretty comfortable overall. Then Boston lose to Seattle the following week. Another round 11 loss in there, though. So a little unlucky in that sense, but still Seattle, an up and down team. They surprise every now and then. After that, Boston lose again, this time to Atlanta FaZe. Search it was not close, but they lost by 7 in the opening hard point. So that could have gone either way. If that happens, it gets to a game 5, which you're still not in love with Boston versus Atlanta in a game 5, but they could have got that extra map. And then, yeah, just the weird series to close it out versus New York with Wardy in the lineup. They look good, though. Like, again, not good in search. Like, back-to-back losses 6-1 after losing earlier in the stage 6-5 a bunch. So if they can get the search back on track, maybe those round 11 losses turn into round 11 wins. The issue I find is with Minnesota, and like if this new lineup they have is legit. I mean, it worked very well for us last weekend. We were preaching like take Rocker plus a map and a half, take them money line maybe if you're feeling crazy, and like it worked both times. Now their Toronto series was maybe one of those classic, like the underdog took the day because they won the opening hard point by 17. Then they follow it up with a game 4 win by 12. Granted, Toronto are a fantastic hard point team, so winning by any margin is impressive, especially when you're Rocker. but like you can't rely on really close hard point wins like that very often. They were outscored in search and destroys, 9 rounds to 10, and then were swept on control on a map that Rocker are quite good at. So again, just feather in the cap for Toronto and how great their control is. But yeah, and then Minnesota, you back up before that, it was okay. They're playing LA Thieves. LA Thieves have yet to win a match during the Stage 5 qualifiers. Rocker had this new lineup. Rocker are somehow like 6-1 on the money line, and it just didn't make sense. And they come out and win in a pretty impressive fashion. Search wasn't pretty, but everything else was a big surprise. Like it's rare that you see LA Thieves lose by margin in hardpoint specifically, and that's what happened. And I know LA Thieves have been shaky lately. They finally got on track with a win over Ravens, but like I don't know what to think of this Rocker team. I'm glad they made the lineup change just because it worked out fantastic last weekend. Will it continue? That's to be determined. As a Rocker fan, I'm just happy they have a somewhat easy opponent in this round one versus Breach. They absolutely could win, but I do still think Breach are the favorites. To me, it could go to a map 5. I wouldn't be shocked. But I don't know. I kind of see another Boston 3-1 in the cards. Minnesota are good enough to take a hard point or a search, maybe the control. I don't know. Map vetoes probably depend a lot on that, but yeah, I think Boston take the day here, as sad as it is, but it at least makes for some maybe interesting content for the Rocker versus Legion moving forward. That fight for the 8th seed. They both very well could find themselves in losers bracket round one, and from there it's lose and go home if you're Legion, and if you're Rocker, you're just trying to at least match what Legion can do throughout the tournament. So as a Rocker fan, not hoping for much, but wouldn't shock me if they do pull out the upset over Breach here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could see it, but I love the numbers on Boston, though. That's the thing. I mean, the thing was, I messaged you because we had talked about Minnesota, and we're like, these numbers don't make sense. Number should not be this number. And then when Minnesota won. I did not partake in Minnesota versus Toronto. That number also didn't make sense, but I didn't participate in that one. I was all over Minnesota versus Thieves, and I said like this number doesn't make sense. And then Minnesota won. I sprinkled a little on the plus. I put something on the +1.5 maps, uh, and I think I put some on the hard point spreads, and then I also put stuff on Minnesota to win. And I messaged you, and I'm like, this is a victory for math, and it was a victory for math, right? Because we said this number doesn't make sense. This number is wrong, and sure enough, positive variance happened, and we won the day there. So that's good. But no, I'm not. I think Boston is good enough. I think Thieves is bad, and that's actually going to lead me into my next point here in terms of uh, kind of second round matchups that we're going to see here. So, um, I've done a couple. I've set them all up. Have you set up all of them? Do you have some future numbers potentially for second round matchups or not?
Yeah, no, I can just type them in and let you know what my model
Okay.
says
So we're
today if the
yeah.
teams were to face off.
So we're
Yeah.
we're taking Optic to beat Florida. So then let's say Florida versus Thieves. I actually have Florida as a favorite to beat Thieves, which sounds crazy, but I actually really do like that. And the thing is, that's not going to happen at all. You're going to get amazing value on Florida here, and I would love. And I think they're in. I think Thieves are in trouble, so I'm going to take Florida there for sure. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I mean, my model obviously doesn't really weigh the Thieves' poor performances lately as much as Mutineers, like over the course of the year. So, yeah, I've got Thieves at a 75% chance to win that match. Maybe a little high. Like that, my gut reaction is that number is a little high, but I don't know. Like, to me, Mutineers, we see this like 2 or 3 times a year where one of these bottom teams gets, I don't want to say gets hot over a 5 game span because Mutineers were 3-2. Like it wasn't super impressive, but they went 3-2 in a 5 game span, and that is good enough for a winners bracket start. Thieves 1-4, right? Kind of looked ugly. I kind of think those are just small samples, and we'll get back to the basics with these teams, and Thieves will show up and win when it matters. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I am curious to see what the pricing on that potential match would be, because it's like, okay, if Florida make it close versus Optic, and Thieves have looked really bad for the last few weeks, like I don't know, like there could be. I do think Thieves are still the favorites, but it could be a price that's low enough where I'm like, I'll just take Thieves to win, or maybe win by a map and a half too. But it's really dependent on what the price is for that specific matchup.
Yeah, I agree with that. But again, you're gonna see something like Florida plus 200, maybe even a higher to win. Like it's gonna be some crazy number on Thieves, and I think that's gonna be something to look forward to. Um, I mean, we're a little iffy on who exactly is going to play London. I think it's going to be Minnesota, but it could also, but if Minnesota upsets them as Boston. But that being said, I've got this ending right here. Uh, Boston 90% chance, Minnesota 81% chance. It's not looking good for London this year. I think this is going to be their last game of the year. Moving on to Surge, I've got Surge as both underdogs to FaZe and Legion, slightly less underdogs to Legion, but I still have the Legion as a sizable favorite against them. Next up, last up basically, it's LAG versus the loser of Subliners and Toronto, and I've got both of those ending in 3-0s. Um, LAG season ending pretty badly at the end of an 03, but a merciful end to a horrible season and one of the worst performing franchises. And they won a major, yes, but one of the worst performing franchises in terms of actual wins and losses, and never made a champion, never made champs in the 3 years of champs existing in this format. So, anything you'd like to add to those matchups, or
Yeah. So I'll just riff through them real quick. So yeah, London versus Minnesota or Boston is going to be not good for London. I agree with you there. Your numbers are a little higher than mine, but I'm in the same ballpark. I think. Let me type that in again. Minnesota versus London. Yeah, 74% chance Minnesota would win that. Boston versus London, 84% chance Boston would win that. So yeah, they're just outmatched either way. And again, another reason why, as a Rocker fan, I'm happy where they landed in terms of the how the bracket shook out. Right, you get a winnable game in round one, and even if you lose that, you get quite possibly the worst team in the league that really isn't playing for much at all. Um, so yeah, either way that goes, it's London is probably done. The Seattle game is interesting. If Atlanta were to lose, which I that would be a big surprise, but if Seattle plays Atlanta, to me right now, Atlanta is a 78% favorite.
95,
Um,
95 here.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I've got both teams neck and neck in hardpoint. They're both middle of the pack, and that's part of the issue with Seattle is they've really fallen back on hardpoint as the year has progressed. Their search hasn't really improved much over the course of the year, and then both teams are pretty close in control as well. So what's carrying phase here is really just search. They should dominate that mode. If that's the case, they likely win in a 3-2 fashion. Um, but again, that one's pretty unlikely just because I think FaZe will beat Vegas. Seattle, Vegas, these teams are neck and neck in my power rankings. I do favor Seattle slightly. And I do think if Vegas lose to FaZe, that does lower Vegas's value overall, unless they, lose in an unlucky fashion and actually show up versus FaZe. But don't take the win. Either way, it's close. I have Seattle as a 56% favorite, mostly predicated on control. And this is something we talked with Vegas versus Atlanta. Like, I think teams know, like, okay, just veto Expo control against Legion, and you can chalk that game three up as a win. And like Seattle are a team that have yet to play Expo. Like, I just think they're like, we're just not going to play this. And if that's the case, like Vegas isn't getting this map in their first two matches, and that's to me that's pretty concerning. Could they make Hardpoint interesting? Yes, because they've been on the up and up, and Seattle have been sliding back a little bit, but I still favor Seattle slightly in that, and then Vegas I favor pretty heavily in the search and destroy. So split on the hard points and the searches, but to me, the control is the difference maker, and why I have Seattle slight favorites over Vegas there. So yeah, that'll be a fascinating matchup if we get that, and I think there's a really really good chance we do get that. And if we do, I'm a huge Seattle fan in that game anyway for Minnesota's sake. So I'm fine with siding with Seattle there. And then yeah, the LAG game, they're probably in the worst spot of any team this major to do anything because they're very very bad and they're going to play a quality team. If it's Toronto, they're really in trouble. If it's New York, I guess they'd have a shot just because, right? We've seen New York go really hot or really cold. You know, if New York come out and look horrible versus Toronto, LAG's got a shot, right? They've shown some fight over the year, but I don't know, man. Either way you slice that, it really looks like an LAG first round exit for me there as well.
LAG plus 2.5, plus 120. Do you take it?
LAG, give me a second to put it. So I'm going to assume LAG versus New York,
I
and you
mean,
said
either. If I could give you a future, LAG to win one map in Major 5. At least one
yeah,
map. At
okay.
least one map.
Plus 2.5 at what's the price?
Plus 120. Do you take it or not? Sight unseen. You don't know if they're playing. You don't know if they're playing Toronto or if they're playing New York. Plus two and a
Yes.
half. You take it, yeah.
Yes.
I
Either
think I
way,
do. I think
yes.
I do.
I'd much prefer versus New York, but yeah, I think they're somehow good enough in all of those game modes where like they could get lucky and take a game 1 or game 2 or game 3.
This
Yeah.
is also it for them too, right? And like, is Toronto or New York really gonna fight? Be like, okay, fine, let them win a map, right? Like, it's like, okay, this is it for them. This is it for them as an organization, as a team. For many of them, this is it for them in the league. Um, you let them have one map, and you let them go out gracefully. All right, that is it for us for this major. Everybody sit back and enjoy. It's going to be a very interesting major, especially at the top. Interesting race to who's going to go to champs between London and between Vegas and Minnesota. Outside of that, it's going to be a great major. We're going to see if Optic can finally win one, or if FaZe or Toronto or someone else can stop them. And then, yeah, we will be back for Champs in a couple of weeks. I think Champs is like the 10th or something. I'm not sure. Whatever. We'll be back soon. We'll figure out what date Champs is, and then we will make a podcast. Okay, Champs is June 15th. So we'll probably be back in a week or two for Champs, talk about some stuff. And yeah, you will see us then. Until then, sit back. We got a lot of COD games this weekend, and it's Memorial Day weekend for our American listeners. For Canadian listeners, we had our long weekend last weekend. Uh, now it's America's long weekend, and yeah, sit back and enjoy. See you, everybody.